The fall of the Empire may have brought peace back to the galaxy, but it also opened up the story of one of the unlikeliest heroes. Din Djarin, also called the Mandalorian, lived to hunt bounties and operated under a strict code. But a chance meeting with fate changed all that for him as he unwittingly got involved in one of the galaxy's biggest secrets. He ultimately defied the Imperial remnants and forged an unbreakable fatherly bond with an equally unlikely figure, forever altering his destiny and the galaxy. Chapter 1. The Foundling. Din Djarin was but one of many victims of the galaxy-wide conflict known as the Clone Wars, a devastating civil war that split the known galaxy into two. The Separatists, a coalition of planetary systems that separated themselves from the Republic, was knocking on the doorsteps of the planet Akvatina, which happened to be Djarin's homeworld. It was 19 BBY, and Djarin was just a child residing in a small village on that planet. Soon after, his village came under attack from Separatist droids that mercilessly slaughtered everyone. Djarin's family got caught in the crossfire, and his parents had no choice but to hide him under a hatch to keep him safe from the mindless droids. While Djarin survived the initial onslaught, his parents died in an explosion. Djarin was about to join his parents in the afterlife when a B-2 series super battle droid opened the hatch and attempted to fire on the child. But before it could, a warrior from the Mandalorian group called the Death Watch destroyed the droid. More Death Watch warriors flooded the battlefield, destroying the remaining droids. Meanwhile, the warrior who rescued Djarin flew off with him using his jetpack, rescuing him from certain death. Unlike the new Mandalorians, who were more progressive with their ideals, the Death Watch embraced the old ways of Mandalore. They followed the traditional creed, which included the responsibility of taking in rescued orphans as foundlings to be indoctrinated into Mandalorian culture. Djarin, who had no one else left following that attack on his homeworld, had been taken in by his rescuers as a foundling. At an early age, he soon started training in the Fighting Corps. He was raised on Concordia, a Death Watch-controlled moon just outside of Mandalore. There, Djarin became a part of Death Watch, which taught him the ways of Mandalore both in terms of their traditions and combat techniques. Then, by the time of the Great Purge of Mandalore, an Empire-led attack that left Mandalore devastated, Djarin had become a part of the tribe. The tribe was part of a larger Mandalorian group called the Children of the Watch, a cult that was far more traditional and archaic in terms of their beliefs and traditions compared to all other Mandalorian subgroups. They followed the Way of the Mandalore, which had all but become obsolete as far as mainstream Mandalorian beliefs were concerned. One of their most important beliefs involved forbidding their members from removing their helmets in front of any living creature. However, Djarin had no idea that the tribe followed orthodox ways. As such, he believed that the tribe's beliefs were the only Mandalorian way of living. Upon reaching adulthood, Din Djarin became a bounty hunter operating under the Way of the Mandalore. He kept his past a secret and hid his identity behind his Mandalorian armor, but he was not the only Mandalorian left. The Way of the Mandalore demanded that the rest of the tribe stay hidden, allowing only one of their own to surface as an active member. Considering Djarin was the only one of his kind often seen by society following the fall of the Empire, he became known as the Mandalorian, or simply Mando. The Mandalorian went on missions and took on bounties on the Razor Crest, an ST-70 military patrol gunship that served as his personal transport and de facto home. He eventually joined the Bounty Hunters Guild during the rise of the New Republic, quickly becoming an elite bounty hunter because of his cold-blooded efficiency. Chapter 2. The Guildsman. Before 9 ABY, the Mandalorian had become one of the most infamous bounty hunters in the Outer Rim. Even when compared to the other personalities working for the Bounty Hunters Guild, Mando stood out because he had an effective, efficient, and no-nonsense reputation. His stoic personality and Mandalorian training made him the ultimate bounty hunter, albeit an expensive one. His skills attracted the attention of his fellow bounty hunters, eventually allowing him to work alongside criminal Ranzar Malk and two Twi'lek mercenary siblings, Xi'an and Kin. Xi'an and the Mandalorian also had a relationship, however, he had a falling out with his companions during one of their missions, leading to the capture of Shin. Then, in 9 ABY, the Mandalorian tracked a slippery mithril, a blue-skinned amphibious alien species, to a dim public house on the frozen world of Pagodon. As he entered the cold establishment, 3 local trawlers were busy harassing the target before they turned their aggressive attention toward the mysterious Mandalorian. One human trawler claimed that the armored warrior had spilled his drink, yet Mando remained silent and stoic, while the others slowly surrounded him at the bar. After the Quarren among them nicked his chest plate with a sharp blade, the Mandalorian acted with swift and lethal precision to end the threat. A skirmish erupted between Mando and the troublemakers, ending in the bounty hunter's victory as the Mithril tried to escape. He then approached the trembling Mithril and revealed the glowing holopuck that marked the creature as his intended prey. He gave the fugitive a simple and chilling choice, informing him that he could bring him in warm or he could bring him in cold. The Mithril eventually followed the Mandalorian out into the biting wind to find transportation back to the gunship known as the Razor Crest. He approached a local Kubaz ferryman and requested a ride, but he immediately refused the droid-piloted speeder that arrived on the scene. Because of his deep and personal distrust of droids, he paid extra credits to secure a ride with a human pilot who operated a less luxurious craft. As they traveled across the treacherous ice, a massive Ravanac suddenly burst from beneath the surface and consumed the speeder along with its unfortunate pilot. Djarin pulled his bounty to safety just as they reached the landing site of his vintage ship. The beast latched onto the landing gear as the ship attempted to take flight, but the Mandalorian used his powerful Ambon Phase Pulse Blaster to stun the creature and break its hold. Once they were safely in the air and heading toward the planet Navaro, the Mithril tried to engage his silent captor in pointless conversation. Mando ignored the chatter and allowed the alien to head below deck to use the facilities. While the Mithril explored the cargo hold, he discovered a grim collection of other bounties already frozen in slabs of carbonite. Before he could react to the horrific sight, the Mandalorian captured him and subjected him to the same freezing process to ensure a quiet journey back to the guild. Upon completing his hunt for the Mithril, the Mandalorian returned to the cantina on Navaro to collect his reward from Greef Karga, an agent of the Bounty Hunters Guild. He marveled at the incredible speed of the warrior, proving how efficient the Mandalorian was compared to the other guildsmen. When Mando refused to accept Imperial credits, Karga offered him calamari flan at half the value, which the hunter took instead of the worthless currency. Looking for more bounties, the Mandalorian tried to take all the pucks, but Karga insisted that others needed work too. Finally, Karga mentioned a mysterious job involving a face-to-face meeting, prompting Mando to take the chit and depart. Chapter 3. Finding the Child. The Mandalorian proceeded toward the location of this mysterious client, eventually arriving at a fortified facility whose heavy entrance was guarded by a watchful TT-8L gatekeeper droid. After he showed the proper identification chit to the mechanical eye and waited for the heavy doors to hiss open, he made his way through the dimly lit corridors to a room where the client waited in the shadows. He found himself in the presence of the client, a man who still clung to the remnants of the Galactic Empire while surrounded by weathered stormtroopers whose armor was stained with the grime of many years in hiding. During their meeting, a nervous scientist named Dr. Penn Pershing appeared and startled the warrior, leading to a brief and tense standoff where blasters were drawn by all parties involved in a display of lethal intent. The client eventually settled the dispute by presenting a single ingot of Imperial forged Beskar, promising a full Camtono of the rare metal if the bounty hunter could successfully retrieve a mysterious asset from its hiding place. While the details of the contract were scarce, the Mandalorian accepted the blinding tracking fob and learned that the target was 50 years old, a piece of information that would soon prove to be quite deceptive given the nature of the being he was sent to find. Following the meeting, the Mandalorian returned to the safety of the hidden covert where his people lived in secret to visit the Armorer, a figure of great authority and wisdom who managed the tribe's precious resources with a steady hand. She spoke of the tragic history of the Great Purge, when the Empire slaughtered their people and stole their wealth to fuel their own galactic conquest. The warrior remembered his own past as a foundling who had been rescued from a terrifying separatist attack during the Clone Wars, feeling the weight of his culture's struggle while the armorer hammered the metal into a beautiful piece of protective armor. She noted that the excess metal from the forging process would be used to sponsor more foundlings, ensuring that the legacy of the Mandalorians would continue even in a galaxy that had largely forgotten their noble ways and ancient traditions. The rhythmic sound of the hammer against the anvil served as a reminder of the strength of the tribe, reinforcing the idea that this is the way they must live to survive the encroaching darkness. Upon arriving at the desolate and rocky world of Arvala 7, the Mandalorian began his hunt by scanning the horizon with his long-range pulse rifle, but he was suddenly ambushed by two fierce blurgs that nearly overwhelmed him with their powerful jaws and relentless aggression. He was saved by a humble vapor farmer named Kuil, an Ugnaught who had seen many other bounty hunters fail in their pursuit of the same mysterious prize that lay hidden within the desert. Kuil believed that the presence of the violent mercenaries at the encampment was a stain on the peace of his world, so he offered to guide the Mandalorian and teach him how to ride one of the beasts to cross the treacherous terrain. Though the warrior was initially frustrated by the stubborn nature of the blurg and his own inability to control it, he eventually found his focus after Kuil reminded him that his noble ancestors once rode the mighty mythosaurs of Mandalore in the ages of old. With a renewed sense of patience and respect for the animal, the Mandalorian finally mastered the creature and prepared to face the small army of guards that stood between him and his target. The Mandalorian eventually reached the fortified mercenary encampment, where he found the lethal assassin droid IG-11 already engaged in a violent firefight with a company of Nikto guards who were determined to protect the facility. Despite his natural and long-standing distrust of droids, the warrior realized that they shared the same goal and proposed a partnership to split the reward, leading to a coordinated assault on the compound that utilized their combined skills. They faced overwhelming odds and the devastating power of an E-Web heavy repeating blaster, forcing them to use every tactical advantage and bit of firepower they possessed to stay alive in the heat of battle. After the Mandalorian took control of the heavy weapon and cleared the courtyard of enemies, the two unlikely allies moved into the main building to finally secure the asset they had been sent to find across the stars. Inside the quiet facility, they discovered a hovering pram that contained a small and innocent infant who belonged to the same rare and long-lived species as the legendary Jedi Master Yoda. The Mandalorian was deeply surprised by the appearance of the child, especially since the tracking fob indicated that the creature was already half a century old. But IG-11 explained that different species aged at vastly different rates over the course of centuries. The droid prepared to execute the infant according to its strict and uncompromising protocols, but the Mandalorian could not allow such a senseless act against a defenseless being, and shot the machine through its head to protect the small life. He stood alone in the quiet room with the child, choosing to protect the small creature and take it into his own custody, effectively changing the course of his life and the fate of the galaxy. Chapter 4. Delivering the Bounty. After the skirmish, the Mandalorian escorted the child through a canyon, where he defeated 3 Trandoshan bounty hunters. Upon finding a tracking fob, he realized that the guild was still hunting the pair. During their camp, the child tried to heal a wound on the warrior's arm with the Force, but Mando returned him to his pram. The next day, Mando found that Jawas had stripped his ship. He pursued their sandcrawler, and he attempted to scale the vehicle, but he fell after being stunned by their ion blasters. Following Kuil's advice, Mando reluctantly agreed to negotiate with the scavengers for his parts. The Mandalorian and Kuil traveled to the Jawa tribe to negotiate for the stolen parts of the Razor Crest, where the Mando initially refused to leave his weapons behind due to his creed. He eventually complied to ensure the success of the mission, but the Jawas mocked his attempt at their language and requested the child. The group eventually agreed on the trade for a mudhorn egg, and the Mando entered a dark cave to face the beast alone. His rifle was jammed by thick mud, and he was brutally battered by the creature as he prepared for a final stand with his vibroblade. Unexpectedly, the child used the Force to lift the massive animal, which allowed Mando to deliver a killing blow. After the Jawas feasted on the egg, the Mandalorian and Kuil repaired the ship, and Mando departed the planet with the child for his bounty. Upon returning to the world of Navaro to deliver the child, the Mandalorian was contacted by Greef Karga, who instructed him to take the small creature directly to the client. On the way to the meeting, the child detached a silver knob from one of the levers on the ship, and Mando took the object from his hands before placing him back into the safety of the hover pram. The Mandalorian eventually reached the Imperial facility with the infant in hand, and he watched with growing concern as the stormtroopers roughly pulled the pram toward the client. Inside the room, Dr. Pershing and the client carefully inspected the child, and the Mandalorian asked how many other hunters were given tracking fobs for the asset. The client simply stated that he needed to ensure the delivery because the child was of utmost importance to his goals. The Mandalorian was then presented with a Camtono filled with precious Beskar ingots as his payment, and he could only watch as the child was taken deeper into the facility. When he asked what would happen to the infant, the client reminded him of the code of the guild as more stormtroopers entered the room to ensure his departure. Not seeking a confrontation at that moment, the Mandalorian took his reward to the secret enclave of the tribe where the other members of his culture gathered. When he requested that the armorer create a full set of armor, a warrior named Paz Vizsla, a descendant of the Death Watch's Pre-Vizsla, accused him of being a coward for taking a job from the remnants of the Empire. The two warriors fought with their vibro knives until the armorer intervened, and she reminded them of the way of the Mandalore, which they all swore to follow. The armorer asked about the damage to his current plates, and the Mandalorian explained that he had faced a mudhorn but refused to sign it because the child had helped him win the battle. She instead forged whistling birds and used the rest of the metal to create a gleaming suit of armor, and the sound of her tools reminded Mando of the traumatic separatist attack from his youth. After he equipped the new armor, he entered the cantina to meet with Karga, and the rest of the guild watched him with envy because of his success. Karga offered him a new bounty puck for the son of a nobleman, but the Mandalorian could not stop thinking about the fate of the small creature he had abandoned. When he asked about the child again, Karga reminded him that asking such questions was against the rules of their guild and told him to go spend his rewards in peace. Chapter 5. The Mandalorian's Decision. Sporting his new armor and working on a new mission, the Mandalorian returned to the Razor Crest to begin hunting his next target, yet he could not help but remember the child. Having begun to develop a deep bond with the small creature, Mando felt remorse for leaving the child to a cruel fate, and he decided to go back to the Imperial facility to retrieve him. Upon returning to the site, he found that the child's hovering pram had been discarded in the garbage, which only fueled his determination. From the roof of a nearby building, Mando used the thermal vision on his helmet and his powerful Ambin sniper rifle to eavesdrop on the client and Dr. Pershing, learning of their plans for the child. Reaching the entrance of the facility, he breached the outer walls and entered the building, fighting off the Imperial remnant's defenses. The Mandalorian then entered the laboratory where the child was kept, killing the guard and destroying the interrogation droid that loomed above the sedated infant. Dr. Pershing cowered in fear and pleaded with the bounty hunter to let the child live, claiming that he had actually protected the creature from certain death. Mando confronted the doctor on what he had done, but when Pershing revealed that the infant would be dead if not for his intervention, the warrior left him alive and took the child in his arms, making his way out of the facility. The Mandalorian fought off the guards and used his new weapons to escape the premises, ensuring that the child remained safe under his protection. The Mandalorian emerged from the facility and intended to return to the Razor Crest, but he found himself surrounded by members of the Bounty Hunters Guild, who tracked the child once more. Grief Karga stood in his path and demanded that he surrender the infant, but the warrior refused and fought his way onto a speeder while keeping the child safe. As the speeder came to a halt under heavy fire, the Mandalorian used whatever weapon he had in his disposal to fend off the enemies. However, the sheer number of hunters eventually pinned him down. Just as the situation seemed dire and the Mandalorian shielded the child with his own body, the members of the tribe arrived with their jetpacks to provide cover. Paz Vizsla told him to escape, while the other Mandalorians engaged the guild, reminding him of the way of the Mandalore. The Mandalorian reached his ship and encountered Karga one last time, using a blast of carbonite gas to clear his path before boarding the Razor Crest. As he ascended into the sky, he looked out to see Vizsla saluting him from the air, and he realized that he needed to find a jetpack of his own. Chapter 6. On the Run. The Mandalorian's decision to rescue the child and antagonize the Bounty Hunters Guild left him with no sanctuary. He could no longer stay in one place and had just turned back on his way of living as a bounty hunter for the sake of a small and defenseless creature. Seeking refuge from the guild, the Mandalorian fled to the world of Sorgan with the child, in search of a sanctuary from the bounty hunters who pursued them. Though he initially commanded the infant to stay behind, the small creature followed him to the village anyway. Shortly after, upon noticing a warrior named Cara Dune at the common house, Mando engaged her in brief but intense skirmish, which only ceased when they noticed the child watching them. Because Dune had already claimed the planet as her refuge, the Mandalorian informed the child that they would have to find safety elsewhere. The Mandalorian prepared to leave Sorgan when two farmers approached him and begged for his protection against raiders, offering him the village's meager savings. He initially declined, but the prospect of a remote location changed his mind as he looked for a safe place for the child. After recruiting Cara Dune to assist him, Mando arrived at the settlement and met a widow named Omera. While the child played with the children, the Mandalorian discussed his commitment to the Way and how he had not shown his face to anyone since he was a foundling. The mission became complicated when Mando and Dune discovered that the raiders possessed a massive armored walker, causing them to realize the village was in grave danger. Despite their recommendation for the villagers to flee, the locals chose to fight, leading the Mandalorian to train the farmers in combat. Under the cover of darkness, they provoked the raiders and lured the enemy walker back to a prepared trap. During the battle, the villagers held their ground while Mando used a grav charge to destroy the machine, successfully securing the peace for the village and the child. The Mandalorian and the child had been at the village for weeks already. As he and Dune watched the child playing with the kids, Dune questioned Mando about his helmet. He explained its removal meant he could never wear it again. Although Dune suggested settling on Sorgan, the Mandalorian planned to leave the child behind for safety. O'Mara later attempted to persuade him to stay and almost removed his helmet, but a Kubas bounty hunter targeted the infant. After Dune killed the assassin, the Mandalorian realized the child remained in danger, and they departed Sorgan together to find a new home in the stars. After leaving the village with the child, the Razor Crest came under fire from a bounty hunter named Ryat Mar, who demanded the infant. The Mandalorian successfully outmaneuvered his opponent and destroyed the starfighter before heading to Tatooine to repair his damaged engines. Upon landing in Mos Eisley, he met a mechanic named Pelimato and paid her to oversee the repairs while he searched for work to cover his expenses. At the local cantina, he encountered a rookie hunter named Toro Calican, who convinced the Mandalorian to help him capture the elite assassin Fennec Shand. Before departing, Mando discovered that Peli had found the child inside the ship, but he trusted her to watch the infant while he ventured into the Dune Sea. The two hunters negotiated passage with Tusken raiders, and eventually tracked Shan to a rocky outcrop, where she pinned them down with her sniper rifle. During a nighttime assault, they used flash charges to blind the assassin, and although the Mando took a direct hit to his Beskar armor, they managed to subdue her. Leaving Calican to guard the prisoner, the Mandalorian set off on foot to retrieve a stray Jewback for his transport. However, Calican sought favor with the guild upon learning that Mando was on the run. He shot Shand and kidnapped the child. When the Mandalorian returned and found her body, he tracked the hunter to the bay. There, Mando used a flash charge to distract Calican, swiftly killed him, and departed Tatooine with the child, having saved his companion from the rookie's hands. Following a job on Tatooine, the Mandalorian contacted an old associate named Ranzar Malk in search of work, and he eventually landed the Razor Crest at a space station known as the Roost. Malk surprised the warrior by mentioning his recent troubles with the Bounty Guild, but he still hired him to assist a crew of mercenaries in a daring prison break. The Mandalorian soon met the team, which consisted of the former Imperial sharpshooter Migs Mayfield, a strong Devaronian named Berg, a droid called Zero, and his former partner, Xian. Tension rose quickly when Mando realized they were raiding a New Republic transport to rescue Shin, their old comrade. During the journey, the hidden presence of the child was revealed to the crew, which further complicated the dynamic between Mando and the volatile mercenaries. Once they boarded the prison ship, the group encountered a lone Republic soldier, and though the Mandalorian tried to negotiate, Xian killed the man and triggered a distress beacon. After they reached the cell of the prisoner Shin, the mercenaries betrayed the Mandalorian by locking him inside the brig. However, the skilled warrior escaped his confinement, used the ship's system to isolate his enemies, and systematically defeated each member of the crew before capturing Shin. He returned to the Roost to collect his payment, but he secretly planted the Republic beacon on Shin, which led a fight of X-Wings to attack the station. Chapter 7. The Liberation of Navaro. While traveling the vast reaches of space, the Mandalorian was contacted by Greef Karga, who requested his assistance in removing the client and his Imperial remnant from Navaro. Karga explained that the Imperial presence had made life difficult for the Guild since the Mandalorian rescued the child, and he proposed a plan to use the infant as bait to eliminate their common enemy. In exchange for his help, the Mandalorian was promised that the bounty on the child would be retracted and his own reputation within the Guild would be restored. Accepting the mission, the Mando first traveled to Sorgan to recruit the former shock trooper Cara Dune, who agreed to join once she learned their target was an Imperial. During their journey, the Mandalorian decided they needed more help to ensure the safety of the child, leading them to Arvala 7, where they found the Ugnaught Kuiil. To the Mandalorian's surprise, Kuiil had rebuilt and reprogrammed the assassin droid IG-11 to serve as a farmhand and protector. Despite his deep mistrust of droids, the Mando agreed to bring the machine along after Kuiil insisted that he should trust his work. With his team assembled, they prepared to confront the Empire. While traveling aboard the Razor Crest, the Mandalorian and Cara Dune wrestled, which prompted the child to choke Dune using the Force. Mando quickly calmed the infant, while Kuiil recognized his unique gift and agreed to build a hover pram. Mando then voiced his deep, lingering distrust for the droid. The Mandalorian arrived on Navaro and met with Greef Karga to negotiate his bounty, although he remained wary of the Guildmaster's intentions. While they traveled across the dangerous lava fields, the group was suddenly ambushed by flying Reptavians that wounded Karga with a deadly toxin. To the surprise of everyone present, the child reached out with the Force and healed the injury, which caused Karga to experience a sudden change of heart regarding his plan to betray Mando. After killing his own remaining aides, Karga confessed his original scheme and agreed to help the Mandalorian infiltrate the Imperial facility. They decided that Cara Dune would act as the captor while Mando wore binders, and the Ugnaught Kuiil was instructed to return the child to the safety of the ship for protection. With the trap set, the group marched toward the city to confront the remnants of the Empire. The Mandalorian accompanied Dune and Karga into the city with the child's empty pram to meet the client, who spoke of Imperial benefits before a sudden transmission interrupted him. Death Troopers opened fire, killing the client and forcing the Mandalorian to take cover behind the cantina pillars. Outside, their leader, Moff Gideon, arrived in an Outland TIE fighter with a company of stormtroopers, while Mando desperately hailed Kuiil on the comlink. Sadly, the Ugnaught was dead because scout troopers had murdered him and snatched the child, leaving the group trapped by Gideon's overwhelming, ruthless, and highly efficient Imperial forces that surrounded them. Chapter 8. Confronting Moff Gideon. Trapped within a cantina, the Mandalorian, Karga, and Dune sought an escape through the sewers, yet their path remained blocked by a stubborn vent. Moff Gideon arrived with a heavy repeating blaster, revealing Mando's secret name, Din Djarin, and demanding a surrender by nightfall. While the Mandalorian shared his tragic history and the details regarding the Great Purge, the droid arrived with the child, to spark a chaotic rescue mission. During the skirmish, the Mandalorian seized a heavy cannon, but Gideon struck the power supply, leaving the Mandalorian warrior wounded, as the group finally retreated back into the dusty Navaro cantina. While lying wounded on his back, the Mandalorian instructed Cara Dune to leave him behind and escape so that she might protect the child, but she protested his selfless request. He handed her a necklace featuring a mythosaur skull, telling her to find the tribe so that they could assist her and the others in their fight from the Empire. Djarin watched in awe as the child used the Force to reflect the flames of an incinerator trooper, providing the group a narrow window of hope amidst the chaos. When IG-11 finally managed to remove the heavy grating on the sewer access pipeline, Mando remained behind, hoping to buy the group enough time to reach safety. While Dune and Greef Karga escaped into the dark sewers with the child, IG-11 stayed behind to tend the wounds of the fallen warrior. The Mandalorian scoffed at the droid, demanding that it end his life quickly despite the droid insisting it was reprogrammed to serve as a nurse and a protector. IG-11 attempted to remove his helmet, an act that Djarin met with immediate hostility and reminder of his sacred vow. He explained that he could not reveal his face to any living being according to the ancient Mandalorian creed, but the droid noted that it was not a living being and thus not subject to the rule. Djarin eventually allowed the droid to remove his helmet, permitting the machine to heal his head trauma with a Bacta spray. After being healed, the Mandalorian and the droid reached the rest of the group deep within the sewer tunnels. As they wandered through the dark, they discovered the tragic remains of the covert, finding piles of armor belonging to the fallen members of the tribe. Djarin initially blamed Karga for the slaughter, but the armorer appeared from the shadows to reveal that Moff Gideon and his Imperial forces were the true culprits. When he asked the armorer to join their escape, she refused, stating that she had to salvage the armor of the fallen and would not leave until her task was finished. Upon seeing the child, she listened to Mando explain how the small creature had saved him from a mudhorn on Arvala 7. The armorer declared that Djarin was now tasked with caring for the infant according to the creed, and she gifted him a mudhorn signet to mark the creation of a new clan of 2. She also provided him with a jetpack, a tool that signaled his status as a true Mandalorian warrior. The group eventually escaped to an underground lava river, where Karga and the Mandalorian attempted to push a ferry boat into the molten stream. Because the boat was stuck to the ground by rocks, Cara Dune had to shoot the obstructions free before they could board the vessel. As they drifted toward the exit, Mando used his visor to identify the heat signatures of numerous stormtroopers waiting to ambush them at the mouth of the tunnel. Realizing the danger, IG-11 announced his intent to sacrifice himself, noting that there was no scenario where both he and the child could survive the coming encounter. Though the Mandalorian had finally come to accept the droid as a friend and an ally, he conceded to the machine's logic as it waded into the lava. IG-11 reached the shore and detonated his self-destruct mechanism, clearing the path for the survivors. Once they emerged from the tunnel, they came under heavy fire from Moff Gideon, who was piloting a TIE fighter. As the Moff circled back for another deadly volley, Djarin activated his new jetpack and flew into the sky to intercept the ship. He used his whipcord to pull himself toward the fighter, struggling to maintain his grip against the wind and the speed of the craft. He managed to place 2 grav charges on the wing of the TIE, causing it to crash into the desert landscape and seemingly ending the threat. Believing Gideon was dead, the Mandalorian declined an offer to rejoin the Bounty Hunters Guild, choosing instead to focus on his duty to the child. However, the Moff had survived the crash, escaping from the wreckage of his ship using the legendary Mandalorian lightsaber called the Darksaber. After burying his friend Kuil, the Mandalorian returned to the Razor Crest and found that the child was holding the Mythosaur necklace he had previously given to Dune. With a new purpose, Djarin took off into the stars to reunite the child with his own kind, knowing they were no longer bound by the laws of the Guild. Chapter 9. The Search for the Jedi. After departing from Navaro, the Mandalorian met with the criminal Gor Koresh to seek information regarding the surviving Mandalorians, eventually defeating the criminal and learning of a Mandalorian on Tatooine. Mando arrived on the desert planet and met with Pelimato, who directed the hunter toward the remote town of Mos Pelgo. Upon his arrival, the Mandalorian discovered that the local marshal named Cobb Vanth was wearing the armor of a legendary warrior. Because Vanth was not a true Mandalorian, Mando demanded the ancestral plate, yet their confrontation was interrupted by a massive krayt dragon that terrorized the village. The two men formed an alliance with Tusken raiders and the villagers to slay the beast. After a fierce battle, they destroyed the dragon, and Vanth stayed true to his word by handing over the armor. Unbeknownst to them, the original owner of the armor, named Boba Fett, watched it from the hills as they departed. On his return trip, Mando fended off a group of thieves who attempted to steal his belongings. Once he reached Mos Eisley, he met with Pelimoto to find a new lead, agreeing to transport a passenger known as the Frog Lady, who knew where more Mandalorians lived. The Mandalorian agreed to ferry a Frog Lady to Trask, but he was forced to travel at sublight speeds to protect her unfertilized eggs, which the child had developed a taste for. While navigating deep space, Mando was pursued by 2 New Republic pilots, forcing him to crash the Razor Crest on the icy world of Maldo Kreis. Shortly after crashing in a frozen cave, the child consumed a forbidden egg and awakened a swarm of lethal ice spiders. The pilots eventually rescued the group, and they allowed the Mandalorian to go free because of his past honorable deeds. He eventually reached Trask in his severely damaged vessel. The Mandalorian approached the moon of Trask under dire circumstances, for the landing array of the Razor Crest had failed, necessitating a perilous manual descent that nearly incinerated the vessel. With the assistance of the Frog Lady, the Mandalorian managed to guide the battered ship into the harbor, though it ultimately plunged into the sea and required expensive repairs from a local Mon Calamari dock worker. After the Frog Lady reunited with her husband, the Mandalorian sought out information regarding others of his kind, leading him to accept passage on a Quarren trawler with the child. This journey proved to be a treacherous trap, as the Quarren sailors attempted to drown the pair in a Mamakor pit to seize the precious Beskar armor. But 3 mysterious Mandalorians descended from the sky to eliminate the attackers and save them from certain death. The leader of this rescue party was Bo-Katan Kryze, who revealed herself as the rightful heir to Mandalore. Though Mando was deeply disturbed when she and her companions, Axe Woves and Casca Reeves, removed their helmets in his presence. Because he had been raised as a child of the Watch, the Mandalorian believed that those who showed their faces were not true Mandalorians, yet Bo-Katan countered his accusations by explaining that his upbringing was rooted in a cult of religious zealots. Despite his initial refusal to cooperate with people he viewed as apostates, the Mandalorian eventually agreed to a deal when Bo-Katan promised to lead him to a Jedi in exchange for his help in seizing an Imperial Gozanti-class cruiser. The group successfully boarded the vessel and fought through the ranks of stormtroopers, even as Moff Gideon ordered the Imperial captain to sacrifice the ship by crashing it into the ocean. The Mandalorian demonstrated his bravery by charging through heavy fire to reach the bridge, where the warriors managed to stabilize the flight path just before the cruiser struck the waves below. Bo-Katan then demanded the Imperial captain to tell her the location of the Darksaber, a weapon that symbolized Mandalorian leadership. Although the Imperial captain took his own life rather than revealing the location of the legendary weapon, Bo-Katan remained true to her word and provided Mando with a destination. She directed him to the city of Culloden on the forest planet of Corvus, where he was told to find a Togruta Jedi named Ahsoka Tano. Unbeknownst to the Mandalorians, Ahsoka Tano was a survivor of Order 66 and a Clone Wars veteran who trained under the famed Anakin Skywalker. However, she was no longer a Jedi as she had left the Order long ago. Just before the rise of the Empire, she eventually survived the Imperial era, becoming a lone operator in the years that followed the fall of the Empire. With this newfound hope, the Mandalorian retrieved the child from the Frog Lady and they departed the watery moon in their barely functional ship to continue the quest across the stars. Chapter 10. Meeting Ahsoka Tano. As determined as Din Djarin may have been to continue with his mission, the Mandalorian failed to repair his ship, so he and the child traveled to Navaro to find Greef Karga and Cara Dune. While the child attended school, Mando met a Mithril, and he agreed to destroy an Imperial base as Karga promised to repair the ship during the planetary mission. After the repairs to the Razor Crest were finally finished, the Mandalorian traveled to the forest world of Corvus to find the Jedi Ahsoka Tano. Upon arriving at the city of Caladan, the Mandalorian met a mercenary named Lang and was brought before the magistrate Morgan Elsbeth. This cold leader, who was a survivor of the Clone Wars, offered him a spear made of pure Beskar if he agreed to kill the Jedi who was troubling her, an offer that the Mandalorian seemingly accepted to gain further information. In the Grey Woods beyond the city, the Mandalorian was suddenly attacked by Ahsoka Tano, who used her twin white lightsabers to test his skills. Mando used his Beskar armor and his various gadgets to defend himself, eventually stopping the fight by mentioning that he had been sent by Bo-Katan Kryze. Ahsoka then spent time with the child, using the Force to feel his thoughts and learn of his history at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. The Jedi learned that the child's name was Grogu. She then revealed that the child had survived the Great Purge and that his species was the same as the legendary Master Yoda, though she was deeply concerned by the strong attachment the little one felt for the Mandalorian, noting that such feelings could lead even the best of people astray. Tano was talking about her old master, Anakin Skywalker, who fell to the dark side and became the Sith Lord Darth Vader. Ahsoka knew Anakin had deep attachments to those he loved. Such attachments led to his downfall as he clung too hard to his loved ones. The Togruta refused to train Grogu not because she was no longer a Jedi, but because she did not want the child to follow the same path of darkness her former master walked. Because Ahsoka was reluctant to train him, the Mandalorian offered to help her defeat the Magistrate in exchange for her guidance. They launched a daring attack on Caladan, where Mando distracted the guards and protected the villagers while Ahsoka confronted the Magistrate. During the battle, Mando killed Lang in a quick standoff. He also eliminated an HK-87 assassin droid during the skirmish, ensuring the safety of the townspeople who'd been suffering under Elspeth's rule. Meanwhile, Ahsoka defeated the Magistrate in a one-on-one duel against the Imperial and her solid Beskar spear. After the city was liberated, Ahsoka gave the Beskar spear to Mando, but still refused to take Grogu as her apprentice. She instead instructed the Mandalorian to take the child to the planet Tython, where he could sit upon a sacred seeing stone and reach out to other Jedi through the Force. Chapter 11. Grogu's Capture. While traveling toward Tython, the Mandalorian encouraged Grogu to practice his powers, hoping the ruins would finally connect the child with the Jedi. Upon arrival, Mando placed the child on the Seeing Stone, but a shimmering energy field soon protected the boy and prevented any further interference. Suddenly, Boba Fett and Fennec Shand arrived to demand the return of the legendary armor, leading to a tense standoff near the temple. Because Fennec aimed her rifle at Grogu, the Mandalorian agreed to listen to Fett, who promised to ensure the safety of the child in exchange for his property. The negotiations between Boba Fett and the Mandalorian were suddenly interrupted by the arrival of an Imperial transport, which unleashed a squad of stormtroopers onto the surface of Tython. Mando attempted to reach the child multiple times, but the intense energy field of the Seeing Stone knocked him unconscious, leaving him with no choice but to join the battle once he recovered. He provided vital support for Fennec Shand by firing a volley of whistling birds, while using his own Beskar plating to absorb incoming blaster fire. When the situation grew dire, Fett utilized a powerful gravity charge to create an opening, eventually reclaiming his legendary armor from the cargo hold of the Razor Crest. Now fully equipped with his wrist lasers, knee rockets, and a jetpack-mounted missile, the veteran warrior annihilated the remaining Imperial forces and even destroyed their retreating dropships. Disaster struck shortly after when a single turbo laser blast from an orbiting cruiser obliterated the Razor Crest, leaving nothing but scorched wreckage behind. Before anyone could react, 4 powerful cybernetic troopers called Dark Troopers descended from the sky, seizing the exhausted child and flying him back to the Imperial vessel. Fett pursued them in his own ship, but the Mandalorian urged him to hold his fire to ensure the safety of the small captive, watching helplessly as the cruiser disappeared into hyperspace. While searching the ruins of his ship, Mando managed to recover his Beskar spear and a small control knob, which were the only items to survive the explosion. Fett then proved his right to the armor by showing his family chain code, confirming that he was indeed the son of a Mandalorian veteran. True to his word, the bounty hunter offered his assistance in rescuing Grogu, leading the group to the planet Navaro. Chapter 12. Gathering Allies and Information. The Mandalorian traveled to the planet Navaro to seek an alliance with Cara Dune, who had recently become a marshal for the New Republic. He needed her assistance to locate a prisoner named Mayfield because he believed the former Imperial could help him find the cruiser of Moff Gideon. After Dune used her authority to transfer Mayfield from the Carthan chop fields, the group gathered aboard the ship to discuss their next move. Mayfield was initially very reluctant to assist the bounty hunter, but he eventually agreed to help when he learned that the child was in danger. He informed them that they would need to find an internal Imperial terminal, and he suggested they travel to the planet Morak to infiltrate a secret refinery. Upon arriving at the jungle world, the group realized that they could not simply walk into the facility without being recognized by Imperial scanners. Because the others were known enemies of the Empire, the Mandalorian decided to go with Mayfield, and they ambushed a transport vehicle to steal the armor of the pilots. Djarin was forced to remove his sacred Beskar armor, which was a difficult choice for him given his strict upbringing, but he knew it was the only way to save Grogu. As they drove the transport toward the refinery, Mayfield tried to engage in conversation by questioning the various beliefs and rules that govern different cultures. He spoke about the suffering of innocent people during the wars between the Republic and the Empire, noting that the survivors often cared little about who was in power. Their journey became incredibly dangerous when pirates attacked the transport, and the Mandalorian had to climb onto the roof to fight them off with his bare hands and a blaster. After a desperate struggle to prevent the volatile rhydonium from exploding, they were eventually saved by a pair of TIE fighters and entered the refinery as celebrated heroes. Once they were inside the bustling facility, Mayfield spotted a terminal in the mess hall, but he became paralyzed with fear when he saw his former commanding officer, Valen Hess. He told Mando that he could not complete the mission because the terminal required a facial scan, which would surely identify him as a deserter. In a moment of incredible sacrifice, the Mandalorian decided to remove his helmet in front of others for the first time in his adult life, choosing the safety of the child over his own personal creed. The machine successfully scanned his face, and he retrieved the coordinates for the cruiser just as Valen Hess approached them. The officer was suspicious and demanded their designations, forcing Mayfield to step in and provide a cover story about a hearing injury. Hess invited them to share a drink to celebrate the successful delivery of the fuel, which led to a tense conversation about the horrors of the past. Mayfield spoke about the thousands of people who died during Operation Cinder, and he grew increasingly angry as Hess praised the destruction of innocent lives. Unable to contain his rage any longer, Mayfield drew his blaster and shot the officer, which immediately triggered a chaotic shootout. Djarin and Mayfield escaped through a window and fought their way toward the roof, while Fennec Shand and Cara Dune provided covering fire from a nearby ridge. Boba Fett arrived in his iconic starship to pick them up, and as they flew away, Mayfield used a rifle to ignite the rhydonium and destroy the entire refinery. After they landed safely, the Mandalorian and Dune decided to reward Mayfield for his bravery by letting him go free, telling the New Republic that he had perished in the explosion. With the location of the Imperial cruiser finally in his possession, Mando sent a holographic message to Moff Gideon to warn him of his arrival, stating that the child meant more to him than Gideon could ever know. This message served as the final promise that the Mandalorian was coming to reclaim Grogu, and he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to bring the youngling back to safety. Chapter 13. The Rescue and Farewell. After the Mandalorian successfully obtained the coordinates of Moff Gideon's light cruiser, he and his band of allies set out to track down Dr. Pershing, who was a key figure in the Imperial Remnant's experiments. They eventually located his Lambda-class shuttle and engaged in a high-stakes chase through the depths of space, which only ended when Boba Fett utilized the powerful ion cannons of the Slave One to disable the smaller vessel. Once the ship was dead in the water, the Mandalorian and his team boarded the shuttle to secure their target. The co-pilot attempted to threaten them, warning Djarin that Pershing was too valuable to be taken, but the Mandalorian simply retorted that they had already met and demanded to know if the child was still alive. Pershing confirmed that the young foundling was safe for the moment, but the situation turned violent when the co-pilot held a blaster to the doctor's head, shooting the other pilot who tried to negotiate for his own life. The co-pilot then turned his words toward Cara Dune, recognizing her as a survivor of Alderaan and stating that the destruction of her home planet was a small price to pay to rid the galaxy of terrorism. This admission was the final straw for Dune, who reacted by shooting the co-pilot directly in the face, a shot so close that it grazed the ear of the terrified Dr. Pershing. With Pershing now in their custody, the Mandalorian traveled to find Bo-Katan Kryze because she possessed the strength and the motivation to help him infiltrate Gideon's cruiser. Bo-Katan was interested in the mission because she sought to reclaim the Darksaber, an ancient weapon that would allow her to rightfully rule Mandalore and unite her scattered people. She also requested to be the one to take down Moff Gideon, something Djarin did not know was incredibly important to the Mandalorians. Despite a brief and tense confrontation between Boba Fett and Koska Reeves, an agreement was eventually reached to take the Imperial ship together. During the tactical briefing aboard the Slave One, Bo-Katan explained that while the cruiser would have once carried hundreds of soldiers, it now operated with a much smaller crew, though Pershing quickly added a terrifying detail to the report. He revealed that Gideon was protected by a platoon of Dark Troopers, which were third-generation battle droids that required no human pilots and possessed immense physical strength. The Mandalorian asked how many people were inside the suits, only to be told that they were entirely mechanical, and were currently being held in a cold storage bay located right next to the brig, where the child was being kept in a cell. The group finalized a plan that involved sending a fake distress call from the captured shuttle to trick the Imperial crew into allowing them to land in the cruiser's primary launch tube. Bo-Katan, Reeves, Fennec Shand, and Cara Dune were tasked with making a loud and violent entrance to draw the attention of the Imperial forces, creating a distraction that would allow the Mandalorian to slip through the ship unnoticed. As the two starships dropped out of hyperspace near the cruiser, the Slave One fired on the shuttle to make the emergency look authentic, forcing the Imperial communications officer to acknowledge their desperate request for docking. Although the hangar control officer initially tried to wave them off, the shuttle crashed into the bay as planned, and Boba Fett destroyed the pursuing TIE fighters before jumping away into the safety of hyperspace. Inside the hangar, the boarding party moved with precision, killing the Imperial crew members and clearing a path so they could split up and begin their respective assignments. The Mandalorian reached the cargo bay just as the Dark Troopers were beginning to power up their systems, and he barely managed to seal the massive doors using a code cylinder he had taken from Pershing. One of the droids managed to force its way into the corridor, proving to be a formidable opponent that was nearly immune to the Mandalorian's standard weaponry. After enduring a brutal physical beating from the machine, Djarin finally used his pure Beskar spear to find a weak point and destroy the droid, after which he opened the exterior airlock to suck the remaining platoon of Dark Troopers out into the vacuum of space. He then hurried to the cell block, where he dispatched 2 guards and entered the brig to find Moff Gideon standing over the child with the Darksaber ignited in his hand. Gideon attempted to play a psychological game, claiming that he had already taken the blood he needed from the child. Grogu, being extremely powerful in the Force like the other members of his species, was instrumental in Gideon's long-term plans of uncovering the secrets behind the Force. The Moff then told Din that he would allow the Mandalorians to leave in peace if he simply walked away. However, Gideon betrayed him the moment Djarin lowered his guard, swinging the Black Blade in a surprise attack that forced the Mandalorian into a duel. Through sheer skill and the resilience of his armor, the Mandalorian disarmed Gideon and took him prisoner, seizing the Darksaber before carrying the child up to the bridge to meet the rest of the team. When he arrived on the bridge, the Mandalorian presented the captured Moff to a surprised Bo-Katan, who wanted to be the one to defeat Gideon. The Moff laughed at the situation and explained that the Darksaber could not be given away freely, and it could only be truly won through the defeat of its previous owner in combat, which meant that Djarin was now the rightful wielder and the person with the claim to the Mandalorian throne. This revelation caused a visible rift between the allies, but the tension was interrupted by an alarm that signaled the return of the Dark Troopers, who had used their flight systems to return to the cruiser. As the droids began to pound on the reinforced bridge, the situation seemed hopeless until a lone X-Wing fighter appeared on the scanners and docked with the ship. The child sensed a presence in the Force and looked toward the monitor, watching as a hooded figure dressed in black moved through the hallways with a green-bladed lightsaber. The Jedi destroyed the Dark Troopers with ease, cutting through the droids as if they were made of nothing. Meanwhile, Gideon seized a moment of distraction to fire a hidden blaster at Bo-Katan and the child. The Mandalorian threw himself in front of the child to absorb the shots with his Beskar armor. Then Cara Dune quickly knocked the Moff unconscious before he could do any more damage. The mysterious Jedi eventually reached the bridge, and the doors opened to reveal Luke Skywalker, the heroic Jedi responsible for the defeat of Darth Vader and Emperor Palpatine during the Rebellion. Skywalker had come to answer the call that the child had sent out from the ancient ruins of Tython. He explained that the child possessed great talent, but would never be safe until he mastered his abilities through proper training. The Jedi Master then offered to take the boy as his apprentice. The Mandalorian realized that his quest was finally over, and he knew that he had to let the child go if he wanted him to have a future among his own kind. In a final emotional gesture that broke his own creed, the Mandalorian removed his helmet so that the child could look upon his face for the very first time. He told the boy not to be afraid and promised that they would see each other again, watching with heavy eyes as the child reached out to touch his cheek before turning to follow the Jedi. As Luke Skywalker picked up the child and walked toward the elevator with his faithful droid R2-D2 following behind, the Mandalorian stood on the bridge and watched them leave, finally completing the mission that had changed his life forever. Chapter 14: Excommunicated. Following the rescue of the child, the Mandalorian returned to his life as a bounty hunter while searching for his hidden covert. He traveled to the Glavis Ring world and accepted a contract for the criminal Kaba Bais, eventually cornering him in a butcher shop. Although Mando attempted a peaceful capture, a skirmish broke out and he was forced to use the Darksaber to kill the target. During the fight, the Mandalorian accidentally burned his own leg with the blade because he was unfamiliar with its weight and power. He collected the bounty and obtained the location of his people, eventually finding the Armorer and Paz Vizsla in a secret sanctuary. The Armorer treated his wound and educated him on the history of the Darksaber, explaining that Bo-Katan Kryze had doomed Mandalore by accepting the blade as a gift. Mando then requested that his Beskar spear be melted down into a gift for the child as he was planning to visit him once obtaining a new ship. The request resulted in a small shirt of chainmail. Meanwhile, Paz Vizsla, who wanted to redeem his family's honor, later challenged Djarin for the blade in a duel. But the Mandalorian emerged victorious despite his struggle with the ancient weapon. Following Din Djarin's victory, the Armorer noticed the heaviness that had been weighing the Mando down. She asked if he had ever removed his helmet, believing that guilt was one of the reasons he felt uneasy. Mando confessed his transgression, prompting the Armorer to declare that he was no longer a Mandalorian unless he bathed in the living waters of Mandalore. Despite losing his identity as a Mandalorian, Din Djarin was still eager to visit his friend. He booked a commercial flight to the desert world of Tatooine. While on the journey, Mando saw a young Rodian passenger with a knapsack that reminded him of the child, which filled him with a quiet sense of longing. Upon his arrival at Mos Eisley, Pelimoto revealed the ship intended to replace his destroyed Razor Crest. Although Djarin was initially disappointed to see a rusted Naboo starfighter, he eventually agreed to help Moto rebuild the vessel into a custom masterpiece. Together, they worked to install a sublight drive and a sleek chromium finish, and they even replaced the droid port with a small bubble dome. After the work was finished, the Mandalorian took the starfighter for a fast test flight through the treacherous Beggar's Canyon. He eventually reached orbit and encountered a New Republic patrol, but he quickly used the superior speed of the vessel to outrun the law. Once he returned to the hangar, Fennec Shand arrived to recruit him for Boba Fett's growing syndicate as they were preparing for an upcoming war with a rival group, the Pike Syndicate. The Mandalorian agreed to assist his old ally for free because Fett had helped him rescue Grogu from Gideon, but he insisted on visiting his little friend before the coming war began. Chapter 15: The Reunion. The Mandalorian flew his new N-1 starfighter toward the lush canopy of a remote forest world, seeking a reunion with the small being he had grown to love. Upon landing, he encountered the familiar astromech R2-D2, who led him through the dense forest to a site where peculiar, ant-like droids were laboring to construct a new Jedi temple. Although Din Djarin expressed his desire to see Grogu, the droid simply signaled for him to wait and promptly powered down, leaving the warrior alone in the wilderness. He eventually discovered a small bench prepared for him by the droids, where he sat and waited until his exhaustion led him to a nap. He was startled awake by the snap of a branch, instantly drawing his blaster, only to find Ahsoka Tano standing before him with a knowing smile. The Togruta explained her presence as an old friend of the Skywalker family, confirming that the building would soon become a school where the child would be the very first student. As they walked together through the landscape, she reminded the Mandalorian of the powerful bond he shared with the small foundling, noting how difficult such attachments could be for a young Jedi in training. From the crest of a distant hill, Djarin finally observed his former companion, watching as Luke Skywalker sat in deep meditation with the child floating nearby. The sight brought a sense of peace to the warrior, yet he felt the heavy weight of the gift he carried in his satchel, which was the small shirt of Beskar mail forged specifically for the foundling. Ahsoka questioned whether his visit was for his own comfort or for the benefit of the student, forcing the Mandalorian to consider the impact his presence might have on the boy's progress. He insisted that the armor was a right of a foundling, meant to protect the child, regardless of his path. Yet, he ultimately realized that a personal meeting might only cause more pain and confusion. With a heavy heart, Djarin entrusted the gift to Ahsoka, asking her to ensure the boy's safety while acknowledging that their reunion would disrupt the delicate balance of the training. Mando turned away and walked back toward his starfighter, leaving the forest world without a single word to the child he had fought so hard to save. From high above in his training, the young Padawan looked up toward the sky, sensing the departure of his protector as the silver ship disappeared into the clouds above the horizon. Unbeknownst to Din Djarin, Luke Skywalker took the Beskar chainmail to Grogu, requesting the child to choose between it and the small green-bladed lightsaber that once belonged to Yoda. The child was seemingly conflicted, as he knew that his choice would ultimately decide what he wanted to be. Din Djarin then returned to the desert world of Tatooine. He was greeted by a Gamorrean guard, and soon found himself in a meeting with Fennec Shand and Boba Fett, who were preparing for an inevitable war against the Pike Syndicate. Recognizing that they lacked the numbers to secure the city, the Mandalorian volunteered to seek out soldiers, traveling across the dunes to the settlement of Freetown. There, he met with Marshal Cobb Vanth, requesting that the formidable people of the town join to fight to protect their world. Although Vanth was initially reluctant to lead his people into another conflict, he promised to see what he could do, showing the respect he held for his old ally. However, Vanth soon after suffered an attack from the famed bounty hunter Cad Bane, who was under the employ of the Pikes. Djarin eventually regrouped with Fett at the ruins of the sanctuary, informing the new daimyo that the Freetown garrison might soon arrive to bolster their ranks. The peace was short, as the Pikes and the cold-blooded bounty hunter Cad Bane surrounded them, leading to a violent confrontation in the streets of Mos Espa. The Mandalorian fought alongside Fett, while the citizens of Freetown finally arrived to provide the necessary reinforcements. Even as they celebrated the temporary retreat of the Pikes, the Mandalorian sensed a new threat approaching, which manifested as two massive Scorpion-Ek droids armed with impenetrable energy shields. The shields of the droids were so strong that even the Darksaber could not pierce them, forcing Djarin and his allies to retreat while Boba Fett went to fetch a powerful weapon of his own. During the chaos, Pelimoto arrived on a rickshaw with the child. R2-D2 had brought Grogu to Tatooine after the little one ultimately chose to return to Djarin, even sporting his new Mandalorian chainmail under his rags. But the reunion was brief, as the group had to survive the droid pursuit, which only ended when Fett returned while riding a massive Rancor. The beast tore through the metal giants, but it eventually went on a rampage of its own after the battle was won. Mando tried his best to calm the rampaging Rancor, but the creature was too strong and nearly overwhelmed him. In a display of incredible power, Grogu stepped forward and used the Force to soothe the beast, gently putting the massive predator to sleep in the middle of the street. Following the victory, Din Djarin and Grogu returned to their starfighter, taking to the skies and leaving Tatooine behind. At the request of the young one, who was comfortably sitting in the pod usually reserved for astromech droids, the Mandalorian pushed the engines to their limits, jumping into light speed and continuing their journey through the galaxy. Chapter 16. Redemption. Not long after his time assisting Boba Fett on the sands of Tatooine, Din Djarin felt the pull of his old traditions, and he sought out the secret refuge of his people, who were known as the Children of the Watch. During an initiation ceremony on a remote shore, a massive lake monster emerged from the depths and threatened the lives of the gathered Mandalorians. But Djarin arrived just in time in his silver starfighter, He used the superior weaponry of his ship to help the warriors defeat the beast, and he then landed to speak with his kin in their dark cave. He met with the Armorer, who remained the spiritual heart of the covert. The Armorer told the warrior that he was no longer a Mandalorian, but she mentioned a path to redemption through the living waters found deep within the mines of Mandalore. Although many believed the planet was poisoned or destroyed during the Great Purge, the Mandalorian presented a fragment of an inscription he had found on the surface, and he argued that the world was still accessible and perhaps habitable. Seeking a companion for his dangerous trek to the surface of Mandalore, the Mandalorian traveled to Navaro to meet with his old friend Greef Karga, who had since become a high magistrate of the planet. They were eventually confronted by a group of unruly pirates led by a man named Vane, who were angry that their favorite drinking hole had been converted into a school. When the pirates drew their blasters, Mando reacted and gunned down the aggressors, though he deliberately spared Vane so the survivor could tell his captain that Navaro was under new management. Djarin then asked Karga to help him restore the remains of the droid IG-11, as he believed the machine was the only ally he could trust in the ruins of his homeworld. Karga took him to a group of skilled Anzellan droidsmiths, but when they attempted to reboot the unit, it reverted to its original programming and tried to kill the child. After the droid was incapacitated once again, the Anzellans informed the Mandalorian that he would need a rare memory circuit to fully repair the mechanical hero. As he left the planet, he was pursued by the pirate king Gorian Shard, but Mando outmaneuvered the enemy fleet in a dangerous asteroid field and escaped into hyperspace. The Mandalorian arrived at the planet Kalevala in the Mandalore system, where he visited the ancestral castle of Bo-Katan Kryze and shared his plan to bathe in the living waters. She was bitter and told him that Mandalore was nothing more than a graveyard, believing his quest to be a fool's errand. Despite her lack of encouragement, Djarin returned to the desert world of Tatooine to find Peli Motto, as he had hoped she could locate the memory circuit for his droid. Although her Jawa associates claimed the part was out of production, Motto convinced the Mandalorian to take an old astromech named R5-D4 instead, promising that the droid could test the atmosphere of Mandalore to ensure it was safe for breathing. When they arrived on the ruined surface of Mandalore, Mando sent the droid into the ruins of Sundari to check the air quality, and he was forced to fight off a group of savage Alamites in a dark cavern. He managed to defeat them using the Darksaber before confirming that the air was actually breathable, which proved the planet was not truly cursed. The Mandalorian took the child deep into the civic center of the ruined capital city, but he was suddenly captured by a terrifying mechanical spider piloted by a strange cyborg. Knowing he was outmatched while trapped in a cage, the Mandalorian told the child to return to the ship and find help. Grogu managed to navigate the ruins and find Bo-Katan Kryze. Lady Kryze returned with the child and used the Darksaber to slay the cyborg and free the Mandalorian from his predicament. She then agreed to lead them to the living waters. When they reached the sacred pool, the Mandalorian stepped into the water to begin his ritual of redemption, but he unexpectedly fell into a deep trench beneath the surface. Bo-Katan dived into the water to save him. As she pulled him back to the surface, she saw the massive glowing eye of a living mythosaur, which was a legendary beast thought to be extinct for millennia. After recovering from his ordeal, the Mandalorian filled a flask with the holy water and prepared to leave the planet with Bo-Katan and the child. They returned to Kalevala, but they were immediately intercepted by a fleet of Imperial bombers that destroyed the ancestral castle of the Kryze family. With her home gone, Bo-Katan followed the Mandalorian to the secret hideout of the tribe, where the armorer accepted the flask of living waters as proof of Djarin's redemption. During their time with the group, the Mandalorian watched as the child began to train with the other foundlings, but the peace was shattered when a massive winged predator snatched a young boy named Ragnar and flew away. The Mandalorian joined a rescue party to track the beast to its mountain nest. Through their combined strength, they were able to save the boy and bring the predator down. This success was followed by a plea for help from Greef Karga, who reported that Gorian Shard was attacking Navaro with a massive capital ship. The Mandalorian convinced the tribe to support the liberation of the planet, and they successfully defeated the pirates and secured a permanent home for the Mandalorians on Navaro. Chapter 17. The Plan to Retake Mandalore. Unbeknownst to both Din Djarin and Bo-Katan Kryze, Moff Gideon escaped the New Republic while en route to face trial for his crimes. His aid came in the form of Beskar-clad Imperial remnants who ambushed the Republic transport. Meanwhile, the New Republic investigators, specifically Carson Teva, initially believed it was the Mandalorians who broke Gideon out after he found remnants of Beskar in the ruins of the transport vessel. However, he soon learned that the Mandalorians were not responsible for the act. Meanwhile, on Navaro, Bo-Katan shared her encounter with the Mythosaur to the Armorer. Knowing what the Mythosaur meant to Mandalorian history as this creature was supposedly extinct, the Armorer believed it was an omen that it was time for them to reclaim Mandalore. The decision also came about as a result of Djarin's successful venture into the mines of Mandalore, proving the planet to be habitable yet ruined. The Armorer, who used to be stringent in her beliefs about the Mandalorian way, had a change of heart. While she originally believed Mandalorians like Bo-Katan were apostates for revealing their faces and forgetting the traditional ways of Mandalore, she now believed Lady Kryze to be the one to unite their people as she now walked both worlds. As such, the Armorer sent Bo-Katan, Djarin, and Grogu on a mission to find other exiled Mandalorians in the hope of bolstering their numbers in preparation for the retaking of Mandalore. They ventured to Plazir 16, where some of Kryze's Mandalorian followers had been hired as mercenaries. She had lost her followers a while back after she failed to recover the Darksaber, which was the one proof of her right to lead them. Axe Woves, the leader of this group, had also taken the same light cruiser the Mandalorians took from Gideon during their rescue of Grogu. Wolves and the Mandalorians were unwilling to return to the fold as they deemed Kryze unworthy of leading them without the Darksaber. However, Din Djarin willingly gave Bo-Katan the black-bladed lightsaber even though Lady Kryze never won it from him. According to Mando's logic, the creature that captured him in Mandalore defeated him and won the Darksaber. But when Bo-Katan defeated the same creature, she won the right to wield the Darksaber, becoming its rightful owner and Mandalore's true ruler. With the Darksaber in hand, Kryze regained her followers and their fleet. She brought them back to Navaro to unite them with the tribe, ready to retake Mandalore with a united group of Mandalorians who may have had different beliefs, but were one in their desire to win back their ancestral homeland. Meanwhile, Greek Karga also gifted Grogu with the IG-12 suit, a repurposed version of IG-11. Now, instead of being a droid capable of independent action and thought, IG-12 required Grogu to pilot it. Djarin was initially reluctant to accept the gift, believing Grogu to be too young to use it. However, it ultimately proved useful in the upcoming mission to retake the Mandalorian homeworld. Then again, as determined as they may have been to finally reclaim Mandalore, they were unaware of the Imperial force that had established a base under Moff Gideon's leadership. Chapter 18: The Liberation of Mandalore. Upon arriving at the ruined world of Mandalore, the Mandalorian fleet remained in orbit while Bo-Katan Kryze led a reconnaissance team, including the child, to the surface. They soon encountered a band of survivors who had endured the Imperial occupation by hiding in the shadows of their devastated home. These survivors pledged their loyalty to Kryze and led the scouts toward the Great Forge, but the journey became a deadly trap. It became clear that the Imperials on Mandalore had been using Beskar to reinforce their forces with Mandalorian-like armor capable of going up against true Mandalorian strength. The Imperial armored commandos ambushed the group and forced them into a hidden facility where Moff Gideon awaited them. Clad in a formidable new suit of Dark Trooper armor, Gideon successfully captured Mando while the other warriors attempted a desperate retreat. In a final act of bravery, Paz Vizsla sacrificed his life to hold the line against the Imperial forces, but he was eventually defeated by 3 Praetorian guards who arrived to secure Gideon's victory. Meanwhile, the Imperial remnants captured Din Djarin, wanting to use Mando as bait to lure the other Mandalorians into a trap. However, Grogu maneuvered into the area where Djarin was held captive. He used his new IG-12 suit and mastery of the Force to aid in Djarin's escape. As they made their way through the base, they found themselves in a room full of Gideon clones. They discovered that the Moff had been using advanced cloning technology to clone himself. Not wanting to see more of Gideon giving them trouble, Djarin sabotaged and destroyed the clones. Soon after, the duo reached the base's command center, where he fought the original version of the Moff. Gideon revealed that his earlier obsession with capturing Grogu was for the sake of perfecting his clones, wanting them to be strong in the Force, a gift he was never born with. However, the Moff was now furious that Djarin had foiled his plans. As Gideon and Djarin dueled, Bo-Katan and her Mandalorians led a charge against the Beskar-clad Imperials. But as Djarin dueled with the formidable armored Gideon, Grogu had found himself in trouble against the skilled Praetorian guards. But Mando could not aid the child as he was far too preoccupied with Gideon, who would have killed him had it not been for Bo-Katan's intervention. Kryze relieved Djarin from his duel with Gideon to allow Mando to rescue the child. Meanwhile, above Mandalore's atmosphere, the Mandalorian light cruiser fell under attack from the Imperials. Axe Woves then used his jetpack to regroup with the light cruiser and send its personnel to the surface as backup to the main attack group. The reinforcements bolstered the Mandalorians' offense against the Imperials as Din Djarin and Grogu defeated the Praetorian Guards. Meanwhile, Bo-Katan also found herself struggling against Gideon, who used the superior strength of his suit to crush the Darksaber. Following their victory over the Guards, Djarin and Grogu arrived. Kryze declared that Mandalorians were stronger together as the trio overpowered and defeated Gideon. Meanwhile, Woves crashed the damaged light cruiser into the base and escaped before its destruction. The crash resulted into an explosion that caught Gideon as the Inferno incinerated the Moff. The very same explosion would have also killed the heroes had it not been for Grogu, who used the Force to create a barrier that protected them from the flames. With Gideon and the Imperials defeated, the unified Mandalorians had finally retaken their home. Following the hard-won battle for their ancestral home, the surviving Mandalorians gathered at the Living Waters for the ceremonial induction of Ragnar Vizsla into the tribe. During this momentous occasion, the Din Djarin publicly adopted Grogu as his son and apprentice, and the small foundling officially took the name Din Grogu. The Armorer then instructed Mando that his journey must continue away from Mandalore so that he could properly train his apprentice in the ways of their people. Shortly thereafter, the warriors watched as Bo-Katan Kryze relit the Great Forge, signaling a new era for their civilization. With the planet reclaimed, Din Djarin traveled to the Adelphi base to meet with Captain Carson Teva. He offered his services as an independent contractor for the New Republic to hunt down Imperial remnants instead of returning to the life of a bounty hunter. Finally, Mando and the child returned to Navaro, where they settled into a quiet cabin provided by High Magistrate Greef Karga. In hindsight, the chance encounter with the child on Arvala 7 and the decision to spare his life changed Din Djarin's fate forever. From a cold and grizzled bounty hunter, he'd become a father to an adopted son, giving him a new purpose in life, all while changing the course of the galaxy forever.